I saw the car crash, so I ran up the bridge. When I ran up the bridge, I saw this dude with 2 guns.
I was worried that one of us would get shot, like any of us.
This was an act of terror, a particularly cowardly act of terror. News from the United States. A pickup truck driver killed 8 people and injured more than a dozen others when he drove down a New York City bike path on Tuesday. The suspect has been identified as a 29-year-old Uzbek national living in New Jersey. Saifullo Saipov, he was shot dead by police and taken into custody after he crashed into a school bus and fled his vehicle. Authorities claim it to be a terrorist attack after the driver shouted Allahu Akbar when he exited the truck. He was reportedly armed with a paintball gun and a pellet gun. Argentina's foreign ministry confirmed Argentine citizens died in the attack.
After the collision, the driver of the truck, a 29-year-old male, exited the vehicle brandishing 2 handguns. A uniformed police officer assigned to the 1st Precinct confronted the subject and shot him in the abdomen. The subject was wounded and transported to a local hospital. A paintball gun and a pellet gun were recovered at the scene. The subject's identity is not being released at this time, pending further investigation. He did make a statement when he exited the vehicle, and if you just look at the MO of the attack, that's consistent with what's been going on. So that along with the statement, has enabled us to label this a terrorist event.
The mayor called the attack near the World Trade Center an act of terror and a particularly coward act of terror aimed at innocent civilians.
It's a very painful day in our city. Horrible tragedy on the west side. Let me be clear that based on the information we have at this moment, this was an act of terror and a particularly cowardly act of terror aimed at innocent civilians, aimed at people going about their lives who had no idea of what was about to hit them. We, at this moment, based on the information we have, we know of 8 innocent people who have lost their lives.
U.S. President Donald Trump condemned the attack and tweeted in NYC, "Looks like another attack by a very sick and deranged person. Law enforcement is following this closely." He further added, and I quote, "We must not allow ISIS to return or enter our country after defeating them in the Middle East and elsewhere. My thoughts, condolences, and prayers to the victims and families of the New York City terrorist attack. God and your country are with you," unquote. First Lady Melania Trump also took to Twitter and said, "My heart breaks for NYC today. Thoughts and prayers as we monitor the situation," unquote. The White House condemned the attack. A statement from the White House said, and I quote, "Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims of today's terrorist attack in New York City and their families. My administration will provide its full support to the New York City Police Department, including through a joint investigation with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We offer our thanks to the first responders who stopped the suspect and rendered immediate aid to the victims of this cowardly act," unquote. Eyewitnesses described the attack as scary and said everybody should be alert at all times.
We saw the car and it was like surrounded by rubble, and we saw like this. Yeah, we saw the guy. He looked like he was wearing like dark colors, and I think he had a beard, but he was holding 2 guns. So it was a little scary.
I don't know. We've been through 9/11, so I mean, but now this truck thing and the cars, using cars against people. I mean, I walk up that road every day, to go to wherever, and it's. I mean, you just have to be very, very careful and vigilant all the time.
We hope and pray for the victims and their families, and for all those who witnessed it, and make sure the children are taken care of course. But remember that New York is a great place to live, and it's a safe place, and it shouldn't really, God willing, it shouldn't cause fear or panic. Kids should be able to go about their lives enjoying their childhood. So, as a teacher of young children, that's on my mind today.
We are joined by Stephen Golub, an international affairs expert. He's joining us from California. Also joining us on the show is Andy Roesgen, our correspondent from Chicago. Going to Andy first. Andy, what is the latest we have on this tragedy?
Well, we know that the suspect, Mr. Saipov, is out of surgery now at Bellevue Hospital in New York City. Just to backtrack a little bit, authorities say that he rented this Home Depot truck from a Home Depot location in New Jersey, then drove into New York, drove into Manhattan, was driving near the West Side Highway of Manhattan towards the World Trade Center. We don't know if that had anything to do with this attack. He was driving, witnesses say, about 50 miles an hour, hitting these bicyclists along the way. 8 were killed. They were all men. And he drove about 10 and a half blocks or so, then slammed into a school bus. On the school bus were 2 or 3 disabled children, and they were injured as well, but apparently they're going to be okay. Then he got out of his truck. He shouted Allah Akbar. He had a couple of toy pistols. One was a paintball gun. The other one was a pellet gun. They were fake guns. He waved them around. He was shot in the abdomen. He went down. He is now out of surgery, as I said. And the big question is, was this a lone wolf attack, which a lot of people here are speculating is the case, or was it part of a larger conspiracy? Well, evidence at the scene and by what investigators are saying is that this looks like a lone wolf attack, a gentleman who just did this on his own without any particular backing of anyone else. And just new in the last few minutes, a friend of Mr. Saipov's in Florida, where he has a driver's license, told NBC News that Mr. Saipov is no terrorist, that he's married with children, and that he likes the U.S. So a lot of questions yet to be answered.
Absolutely, a lot of questions yet to be answered. But Andy, 8 people have already been killed. Many more must have been injured. Do we have any numbers as to how many people are still injured and how many of them have grievous injuries?
We are understanding that 11 other people, besides the 8 killed, 11 other people were injured, and it looks like they will survive their injuries. Thank goodness. Law enforcement, they're thanking their stars today for a lot of reasons. Number one, that he wasn't armed with an actual gun, which could have resulted in many more lives lost. Also, the fact that he ran into that school bus, which stopped his momentum in the truck, and the fact that there was a police officer nearby when he jumped out of the truck and was able to shoot him fairly quickly. Again, he's out of surgery. And one thing I should note that, and maybe your other expert will talk about this, now that he's in the hospital, the FBI does have the right to ask him questions directly without giving him his rights. Normally, when police arrest a suspect in the United States, they have to give them what's called their Miranda rights, which says that a police officer will tell you, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say could be held against you in a court of law. In this kind of case, when it's deemed terrorism, the FBI has the right to say, to not give him those rights, to just ask him directly if they feel that there is a threat that's still looming. However, anything he says immediately in that first question apparently cannot be used against him in a court of law. So something interesting to think about, but certainly authorities are going to be talking to him quite soon.
Right. Stay on with us, Andy. I'll bring in Mr. Stephen Golub into the conversation. Stephen, what do you make of this attack? Is this actually a lone wolf attack, or could there be a bigger, sinister design behind it?
Well, the short answer is that it's too soon to tell, but I think Andy's excellent summary did lean towards the strong possibility that it's a lone wolf attack, and that does seem to be the case. Ironically, right now in the United States, it's the holiday of Halloween. Right. It's a fun holiday. It's not a religious holiday in which little children dress up in costumes, go door to door, get candy, and adults dress up and go to parties and even have parades. And they're having a parade in New York right now, adults dressed up in costumes and celebrating even under these somber circumstances. And if there were a really strong fear that this was part of a coordinated series of attacks or something else was looming, they might have called that off. The fact that they didn't is one positive sign that this is a lone wolf attack, possibly committed by someone, whatever his rationalizations, was disturbed in some ways.
Right. And America has been under attack for a while now. There have been phases when we have had several strikes and several isolated incidents across the country. Now, ISIS, often we see that every time an attack like this happens, we see that groups like the ISIS or some other terror groups, they end up taking responsibility. But when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to maintaining law and order, what can the security agencies do, Stephen, to alert citizens and make them aware about such lone wolf attacks, if indeed this was one of those?
Well, there are, people who are just generally aware of the fact to be aware that if there's an unattended package, not that it took place in this attack, an unattended package, they should immediately report it to authorities. Law enforcement authorities try to monitor communities or maintain good relations with communities so that community leaders might tell them if someone might be disturbed or might acting in ways that are potentially violent. There's only so much they can do, though, to try to prevent this, especially such a low-tech attack such as this. I might add that one other element of this attack to be thankful about, if we could ever be at all thankful about any event in which 8 people are killed, is that in addition to what Andy mentioned, it looks as though, from at least one report I saw, that this fellow picked a relatively uncrowded stretch of this bicycle path to attack. Other parts of town might have been more prone to more casualties and deaths. Again, not much to be too thankful about, but it could have been worse.
Right. And Stephen, just for the benefit of our viewers, just talk to us a little about the psychology behind a lone wolf attack. We are not presuming as of now that this is indeed a lone wolf attack, but it looks highly likely that this could end up as one. What goes into the mind of an individual who decides to carry out an attack like this on innocent civilians?
Well, that's a great question. One short answer is, what could motivate someone to do such a horrible, despicable thing? It could be that he was inspired by some ISIS materials he'd seen online. There are reports that either a note or a pamphlet expressing sympathy to ISIS was found in the truck that he'd used. But we shouldn't discount the possibility that whatever his superficial motivations were, this is someone who was disturbed, who snapped in ways that had nothing to do with any ideological or religious zealotry, that he might have used that as an excuse, and that there were some deep psychological problems that this fellow had that were expressed in this horrific manner.
Right. Please stay on with us, Stephen. I'll go back to Andy. Andy, what more do we know about this particular individual? You mentioned some details, but what are the security agencies divulging about the background of this person, and what all do they know about him?
Well, still trying to figure that out at this point. But again, the basics are 29 years old, from Uzbekistan. And we do have, the U.S. has ties to Kazakhstan in Uzbekistan. To learn more information. They have people over there they can rely on to figure out if he had any kind of training in Uzbekistan for this sort of thing at all. Uzbekistan, as we know, is considered a pretty good safe haven for ISIS. ISIS has a pretty good presence there. Again, as I said, this friend was telling NBC News that the suspect, Mr. Saipov, has a Florida driver's license, and the friend in Florida said that no, he's not a terrorist at all. And just picking up from something that Stephen said, and maybe he can elaborate on this more, is that in 2014, ISIS as an organization put out the word to everyone across the world, to anyone who might sympathize with them, to do anything, to pick up a knife, to pick up a gun, to pick up a car, to do whatever it takes to carry out these attacks. And we've been seeing them sort of scattershot ever since. But what's interesting that since then, as we know, the caliphate in Syria has been largely destroyed. ISIS has really taken a beating as an organizational group in its locations. So the question might come up, well, did this man, Mr. Saipov, ever travel to Syria or travel and then come back to get training from Syria or from ISIS? Well, you know, maybe, maybe not. It would be difficult now, of course, because the organization has been so badly beaten there in Syria, for example. So, again, that's just one of the clues that investigators have to put together. But beyond that, we don't know much about his personal life or anything else beyond what we already, these basic facts about his age and the fact that he was apparently living in Florida, possibly living in New Jersey for a while as well. And, you know, he just did all this today. Just today, apparently. He went down to the Home Depot just today in New Jersey, rented the truck. So that's why, you know, authorities kind of think this might have been kind of a scattershot kind of thing. As Stephen said, there were other places he could have gone to carry out a much more devastating attack, even right alongside that bike path where he went. Apparently there was far more people nearby that he could have targeted. So that is what's kind of making folks here in the U.S. lean towards this lone wolf, maybe inspired by an ISIS online type of thing, rather than a larger conspiracy.
Also, Andy, there is information which suggests that this individual had come to the United States from Uzbekistan in 2010, and he also had a green card that allowed permanent legal residence in the United States. Now, for anybody coming from another country and wanting to settle into United States, particularly from countries where, you know, there are doubts and there are suspicions of people having access to radicalized elements, how easy or how difficult it is for somebody from a country from, say, like Uzbekistan to get into the U.S. and get a green card there?
Well, that's kind of a bone of contention right now going on in the U.S., even tonight, because Uzbekistan is not on the presidential, you might, of course, you've talked about this, I'm sure, Donald Trump making his terror watch list, he's wanting to ban incoming visitors from certain countries. Uzbekistan was not on that list. Right. And neither were the Tsarnaev brothers back when they came to the United States. They were the ones behind the bombing of the Boston Marathon in 2013. So, you know, the question is, if someone's a Muslim from one of these countries that are on the banned list, that for most people is considered by Donald Trump to be, you know, him wanting to keep them out. But from these other countries, you're right. There is no way of really knowing what kind of ideology they have and whether or not they're radicalized once they come into the U.S. We just don't know.
Right. I would request Andy and Stephen to stay on with us. Meanwhile, in light of the attack in New York, which is currently being investigated as terrorism, Site Intelligence Group is redistributing a dispatch from 2 months ago that showed an individual holding a phone with the Islamic State's logo less than a mile from the scene of today's attack. The photo was disseminated by an ISIS supporter in August 2017. Going back to Stephen Golub, who is joining us from the United States. Stephen, we are also given to understand this is preliminary information which is trickling in from the U.S. There are suggestions that this accused, Mr. Saipov, he had been on the radar of federal authorities for a while, although it is not clear whether he was under scrutiny for directly being involved in any wrongdoing or illegal activities or in some other related case. As I was asking Andy also, he came from Uzbekistan in 2010 and got a green card in the US. How easy or difficult it is for people from countries like Uzbekistan or elsewhere to come to the United States, get a green card there and get permanent residency?
Well, you do have to jump through all sorts of hoops, no matter where you come from, what country you come from, to be able to immigrate to the U.S. to begin with, and then later on to get a green card. The requirements are more stringent, and the Trump administration is aiming to make them even more stringent for people from certain countries. But as Andy pointed out, Uzbekistan has not been on that list, and potential terrorists could come from many, many countries. So it is difficult to get a green card, but, you know, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'd say probably hundreds of thousands of people get it every year for perfectly legitimate business or family reunion or family unification or other reasons. So it's a part of life here, and in many respects, it's a very positive part of life here for people who've been born elsewhere to come here and build their lives here. So I hope there isn't an overreaction in response to this one person doing this one horrible thing.
Also, Stephen, how easy is for an individual like this particular accused to slip off the radar or not being detected by the security agencies in the U.S.?
Well, you know, from what you just said, and this was news to me, perhaps he was on the radar, but it was just based on a statement or a trip he'd taken or something that might be suspicious, but that you would never arrest someone for. I don't think someone could, who done something suspicious would ever slip totally off the radar. But we're not a country that indulges in mass roundups of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who may have one potentially suspicious activity or act or photo in their background. So it's not that easy to completely slip off the radar, but the authorities can't keep track of everyone to the point that they're monitoring their movements every day.
Right, and I'll go back to Andy. Andy, when is this individual likely to be interrogated by the agencies?
Well, if it's like anything in the previous cases where there have been cases like this, high-profile shootings and such, the FBI and all the terrorism joint task force that's involved in this immediately puts his hospital room on lockdown. It's a very secure place. And the questions start immediately. I mean, the moment he comes out of surgery, and the moment he's lucid, they start asking him questions. And you know, they sort of start, you know, from point A to point B, and they just sort of expand from there. Where did you come from? What was the plan here? All this sort of stuff. So that starts immediately, and there's just a big question now of what his inspiration was. That's the first question, I guess, or one of the first questions they would ask him. If there are others out there planning similar attacks. You know, you mentioned earlier that photograph that someone had taken not far from this location with an ISIS logo apparently in the photograph. That's happened in cities around the country. In fact, I remember here in Chicago, that happened a few years ago. Someone took a picture of an ISIS flag with some words on it in front of a Chicago landmark and posted on social media. Who knows what that means? That could mean something serious. It could mean just copycats. But now authorities, more than anything else, I think that what they're really concerned about is any more copycats. If there was no conspiracy here, and again, we don't know that, but if this is just a gentleman who decided to do this on the spur of the moment, the fear is always the copycat angle. And I should mention, too, that authorities are looking at the likelihood. They think that he probably wanted to die in this attack. When you get out of a vehicle waving two fake guns and running around and shouting Allah Akbar, you're asking for the cops to kill you. It's a suicide by cop, as they call it. And he probably intended to die. So the fact that he's still alive is great for the intelligence community, at least to start asking him questions and to eventually, hopefully, put him on trial.